Welcome to the CE Pro podcast. I'm Executive Editor Arlen Schweiger. This week we're making a power play, as in talking about the merits of power protection, power conditioning, power management, and more. Jimmy Paschke and Vince Luciani of SurgeX join me on the podcast to discuss best practices, RMR opportunities, new products like the Squid, and how to level up your customers' power game. As always, be sure to subscribe to CE Pro's YouTube channel and hit that like button on our videos, or subscribe to the CE Pro podcast on Apple and Spotify and leave a review. Jimmy Paschke, Director of Residential Sales, and Vince Luciani, Senior Sales Engineer at SurgeX. Thank you guys so much for joining the CE Pro podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. Our pleasure.
So guys, today we're having you on to talk about power solutions. And the first thing we should probably do is kind of detail just how extensive a category this is now. There's a lot out there for integrators to work with these days on projects. Jimmy, let's start with you. In terms of the types of products that integrators can incorporate into AV systems, smart homes, anything else these days, what is out there for them?
I think the approach that we take is slightly different than a lot of power brands out there, because we really take it from the perspective of not necessarily what's available, Arlen, but what are we trying to solve for? And that's a very interesting, way to approach power, because I think often our integrators are so used to throwing boxes into a system. And actually, I just saw something on LinkedIn today from a gentleman, Steve, over at Control Concepts. He says we throw boxes into a system. When we have a problem, we take them out, we throw another replacement in. We might do it 2, 3, 4 times. Then we might start digging into, I wonder if we had a networking problem, a power problem, a temperature issue, installation, or Steve's point, a programming related issue. So I think when it relates to what should we put into a job, it should be more about what do we have to solve for? Do we have any power quality issues? If no, okay, then maybe we just need some outlets, and maybe outlets that are IP addressable would help. If we have unstable power, perhaps we want to put in some voltage regulation. We like to utilize that with our online double conversion UPSs. A lot of amplifiers in the job. Well, we don't want a ton of inrush. So we might, when Vince goes to design a system, he might put in a sequencer product or two to help us sequence up or down those amplifiers. So it's really about what is the application, and then what are we trying to solve for? And that's where Vince has been crucial in helping the sales force with the most appropriate product for the application and the power quality issue we might need to mitigate against.
Right. So maybe let's talk about, in terms of the category drivers that, the market is really kind of making this a very growing category. We're certainly seeing a lot of innovative solutions in there. In talking to your dealers and seeing the kind of jobs that, Vince is helping to design for, what are they telling you are some of the things that are really driving the sales of the products in this category? And then in terms of education, because there are so various things out there, I mean, obviously, I'm sure the first thing that customers are thinking about are, okay, do I live in a hurricane zone, and do I need power protection? But it's got to go way beyond that. So in terms of, those kind of things, what are you hearing from dealers, and what do they need to educate their customers on?
Well, I think, Vince, probably the number one thing we see for the last few years now, Arlen, we've been receiving data, power quality data logs back from customers. And I hate to say, it's usually when they're very frustrated and at the point of, we just don't know what to do. And we heard Jimmy and Vince and others in SurgeX say, hey, pay attention to power, but maybe we didn't, do some of the things that we wanted to do because of budgetary concerns or what have you. We get the data back, and the data, I will say somewhere in the ballpark of 85, 90% of the time, revolves around unstable power being the source of what's feeding an experience, whether that experience is in a commercial environment or a residential environment. And so if it were me, I would say IP addressable products are probably all the rage. They've been the rage since 2010 when Blue Bolt came out, 2012 when Wattbox came out. Those two things have really driven the two sides, commercial and Resi, to be very effective and efficient at rebooting devices. Vince and I try to really drive both sides towards the path of, hey, stop reacting, mitigate for and control your power situation at your job site. And really the biggest way we've been able to get that functionality across is by promoting double conversion online UPSs, whether they're small or big.
Arlen, I think the bottom line is the reason why we're doing this, for the end customer is to have a better experience with whatever equipment our dealers are putting in there, right? If your equipment is not available, whether it's a home theater or a security system or an IT system, if it's not available to use, then that's not good. So what we're trying to do is increase uptime for the end user. And then I think for the dealer to reduce the service burden is the way that we talk about it, right? So it's like if you put $150,000 worth of equipment into a house, which is not unheard of course, in our industry, you're going to be on the hook for that, right? They're not going to call the power company and say my system's down. They're going to call the dealer, right? So we can keep it up and running. It's a benefit to them for their goodwill towards their customer and their name brand preservation.
Right. The dealer is the one who gets to, I don't want to say necessarily be the hero. I mean, hopefully they're not the ones that are going to be, taking on that kind of crazy responsibility or crazy, blame if something happens. But certainly they're the ones that are going to be in position to proactively try and stop and prevent things like that from happening. So,
and you see that in our industry when our AV guys took IT under their wing, right? At the beginning, right, the IT was a different company,
right.
And when the IT wasn't a very good system, then the AV guy says, well, I need to bring that in house, So it's harder to bring power in house, right? It's hard because it takes licensed electricians. So that's where Jimmy and I kind of help our dealers to kind of help them to talk the right talk so that they can talk intelligently to the electricians and get things worked out so that their system works at the best at the top potential and work for as long as a period as it can.
Right. So let's take a look at some of those solutions that you work with and have, sort of that story kind of being told through some of these solutions, and then you can kind of take a look at how dealers can see them through that lens and how they're able to pitch that to the customers. So for you guys, Vince, I wanted to start with you. And congratulations, you won a Best Award, SurgeX did this year for your UPS plus isolation transformer. So we wanted to start there and talk about just some of its key features and more so some of its applications and things that it can do, and maybe even things that dealers didn't really know it can do.
So this particular UPS that we've got on the screen, it's a regular two rack space UPS, but the big difference between this particular UPS and a lot of the other ones on the market is that it's got an integrated isolation transformer. And I got a couple of slides here that kind of talk about what's an isolation transformer, why you need one. So here is a connection diagram of how an electrical AC outlet is hooked up, right? The breaker provides the energy through the line, the connection called line. The neutral is that return path, and ground is that relatively new connection that was started in the 70s. Older houses will have the 2-prong, but newer houses since the 70s are going to have this 3-prong outlet. If you notice in this diagram that neutral and ground are connected together, right? And if you know anything about electrical circuits, when 2 points are connected together, the voltage between them should be 0. But what happens is when you have a high current device, such as a power amplifier, there's nothing against this brand of power amplifier, it's just a representative power amplifier. When it pulls a lot of current, and that current returns through one of the wires, the neutral wire in this case, the wire resistance will cause a voltage drop, and where that voltage drop is seen is across neutral and ground. Okay, neutral and ground again should theoretically be 0 volts between those 2 points, but as you can see in this adaptation, there's some voltage there. So what happens is if you plug something else into that outlet, it sees that neutral to ground voltage. Depending on what else you plug in there, may not want to see any voltage between neutral and ground, because the expectation is that there should be 0 volts there. So it could cause lockups in sensitive microprocessor-based equipment. Usually that's what we see when we see these neutral to ground issues. And a lot of times that neutral to ground is not a constant voltage; it's bouncing around, and that kind of exacerbates the problem as far as these sensitive pieces of electronics being plugged into a circuit like that. So what can you do about it? You can add an isolation transformer. So an isolation transformer, here's a schematic of one, it's simply a 1-to-1 transformer between the line and neutral. So you get 120 volts going in to the transformer. You get that same 120 volts coming out between the line and neutral. But what it allows us to do is establish a new neutral to ground bond, and a neutral ground bond is a fancy word for connection. It allows me to connect those together. We have some people that are tempted. It's like, well, if neutral and ground are connected in the panel, why can't I just connect them at the outlet and get rid of this problem? That is really against National Electric Code. National Electric Code wants separate paths between the outlet all the way back through any sub panels. Neutral and ground are separated all the way back to the main breaker panel is the only place you can have a neutral to ground bond, except if you go through an isolation transformer, then you can connect them again. So instead of that neutral ground bond being 200 feet, 300 feet away in the main breaker panel, now it's sitting in the bottom of your rack. What that means is when you have high current draw devices and you look at that neutral to ground voltage on your voltmeter, it will be 0 volts. And also it knocks out any high frequency noise, because if you think about an electrical wire, it's basically an antenna, right? And it's picking up all this RF energy, and it can be represent itself or manifest itself as noise on that ground bus. Well, if we connect those together, there you get no high frequency noise between neutral and ground. You don't get any low frequency current noise. It's really a great solution.
It does. It looks fantastic, Vince, and thank you for sharing that one. I know you want to share your screen on another product that was a very exciting introduction. Last year at ISE, Integrated Systems Europe, I happened to be able to see the Squid before, I believe it was before it started shipping. It was still kind of in its last stages. And that is a product that I know SurgeX is really excited to talk about, and a unique product. So in terms of those highlights and applications, what are some of the things there, Vince?
Well, the Squid is a unique device, and I believe that's why it's getting so many awards. It's unique in that it is a hybrid AC and DC power center. And we get a lot of questions. Well, why is it that you want to have DC in a power center? And the main reason is to get rid of those wall warts, right? The little DC converters that are external, usually to smaller devices. What we see, and I know that this particular application, we don't see, you're not going to see a lot on the residential side, but the application that the Squid was originally intended for was for conference rooms and for behind monitor kind of applications where you're trying to get rid of all those rid of all those wall warts, right? It's a robust connection because it's going into the Phoenix connectors that you see, the yellow and the red and also the orange Phoenix connector that's on there as well. So it comes in 3 different versions: 2 12-volt connections, 2 independently controllable 12-volt buses, 2 24-volt buses, and then one that's got a 12 and 24 volt combo. Like I said, the orange connector is a 5-volt connector on there. The 5 volt's not switchable, but it is on there. You can actually even get it with or you can get to the 5-volt bus via a USB-A a connector on there as well. It's not a hub, just a power port. But so we took AC control and DC control, put it into one box, and then layered on top of that great control capabilities via a user interface. It's a web server that's built into it. It's a very same style a lot of people use. If you're familiar with our Access Elite products, our Access Elite is kind of our flagship control product that allows you to individually control and individually program multiple sequences using the 8 outputs that the Access Elite has. You can do the same thing with Squid. You can have sequences that have just AC or a mixture of AC and DC or just DC. So it's got that capability. And then another one of our products is called the Envision. And the Envision is a power diagnostic tool. So we put a software version of the Envision tool inside Squid as well. So it's really a multi-function tool that we're really happy with. And Jimmy, maybe you can touch upon how this is used on the residential side as well.
Yeah, what I love so much about this Squid product is that it's great that it's got the control aspect and the protection of DC and AC. But really, I was ecstatic because my guys on the Resi side are so used to utilizing a product called Envision to help diagnose power quality or assess power quality at a job site. And the downsides to Envision are it's a difficult piece to mount somewhere. It really wasn't designed for residential or commercial rack spaces. It was meant to sit on the floor and have like a Konica Minolta or Ricoh or Canon imaging device plug into it. And then a service tech would pull logs out of the Envision piece to see if they should throw parts at a copier or if they needed to address a power issue. And, that moment when I understood what the ESP side of ESP SurgeX was doing back in 2014, I said, well, hell, our guys need to assess what's going on with power before they start swapping stuff left and right. And, Arlen, you made a comment earlier about, hopefully our guys aren't getting the blame. Well, the reason our guys, the integrators, get the blame is because it's the stuff they put into the job that's not working. And the reason the stuff may not be working correctly, appropriately, without interruption is sometimes as a result of some sort of crazy power situation, some ghost in the system, some constant fluctuation, some pattern to, we've had HVACs kick on at certain times of day, and then boom, there's a direct correlation to an issue with power product. Ceiling fans, lighting, fixtures, switches, compressors, and then you've got just the basic utility issues, brownouts. I had a gentleman call yesterday from Northern California. We get brownouts left and right. I'm like, yep. And we hear about it all the time. But you know what? Vince and I have heard from all over the country, various power issues, mostly that revolve around the unstable nature of the power grid. And if you need to know something about power that you're not familiar with, Arlen, you mentioned earlier, hey, I'm not an expert in power. Well, guess what? Most of us in this channel are not experts in power, but the Squid can be your savior because it can help us by recording data. And it's not hard to set up. We plug it in, we put it on the network, it records as soon as you plug it in. Then we extract logs, hopefully after about 30 days is what Vince likes to see. Then we take a look at the data and we're trying to see what are we looking at here? Do we have a power problem or not? And then do we have a solution? And oftentimes Vince's solution doesn't always equate to selling a product, but it certainly equates to unparalleled service, because you're going to take the blame away from you if it is a power problem, and you're going to go help the end user fix the actual issue that's at the root cause. Is it electrical wiring? Yes or no? If it's not, is it coming from the service side, the utility? And those two things are pretty important, because we could put Band-Aids on AV all day long, but are we actually fixing the problem?
Right.
So Vince, what are we looking at here? Sorry, Arlen.
So I was going to say, Jimmy, sticking with you,
Okay.
in terms of looking, yeah, in terms of looking at the products that you have with all the diagnostics and remote management capabilities. You talked about service, so I want to ask you a bit about
Mm.
service contracts and setting up those and generating RMR and that kind of potential that products that have these tools through power sources, through power management solutions today. Um, does that set up integrators to, to generate that kind of revenue stream? And does, that make it cross into more of, how are they using these tools to show that ROI to customers who
Mm.
are investing in these kind of solutions?
Yeah, I think that given the approach that Vince and I are taking with the company of what are the issues that you're facing on site, and here's how we would approach those issues, or hey, this is a brand new site. We don't know what issues we're going to have. Okay, if you kind of want to mitigate for all the stuff we've seen, 90% of it at least, then here's the approach you take. Solid power foundation with control of power. In tandem with that, we're going to continue to monitor power. We're not going to do it only when we have a service call. We're not going to do it just to take a benchmark reading in the beginning. We're going to leave Squid on site 24/7 every day. And that way, at the end of the month, when I, as an integrator, want to produce a report to an end user, which might include things like, your temperature levels were such and such, your network conditions were such and such. We put a very expensive, nice, robust network in, and guess what? You had no issues last month. Well, same could be said for the power side. That solid power foundation with control aspect that we, swore that you needed. Guess what? You had 10 events last month you were unaware of because we addressed it with the AV system. Now, maybe you saw your lighting dip down and back up. Maybe you had an issue in the office area, billing, whatever. Maybe it was in the kitchen and not in the home theater if we're talking Resi, but it didn't affect your AV experience. So that's really, I think, an added value. It's not something as a new revenue stream, but it certainly adds to those folks that are selling warranty or service or monitoring contracts, where they can build up a report that says, hey, look, here are the issues this site experienced, but you didn't experience any of them. And that's
Right.
that's what we're hoping for.
Vince, is that something that's easily enough to show on the screen? Some of those capabilities that an integrator would be able to kind of take out, maybe show the dashboard and say, hey, here's what we're monitoring for you, on a monthly basis. And, we're going to send you a report every month saying that you're going to have this, this, and this.
Yeah, those reports can definitely be created using this data. But just to kind of to drive home, Jimmy's point, what you're seeing on the screen here is the voltage here in my office over the last 7 days. And the one thing that we take for granted about power is that it's constant. You may not realize it, but power is a utility that is generated real time. So the energy that you're using there in your home office was generated microseconds before it is being utilized. So what that means to me is that the power company has to kind of prove itself every moment of its existence. Just because they're good now does not mean they're going to be good 10 minutes from now. And this is really kind of the frustrations that our dealers have, right? If they don't have an Envision tool to see what happened in the past, they get a hiccup in a system, they go on site, they think maybe it was a power issue, they might be able to talk the customer into getting an electrician out there. By the time the electrician gets out there, they're going to put a meter in the wall and say, it's 120, I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, you're right, it's 120 now, but 3 days ago when the system hiccup, there was some kind of power fluctuation. So with this tool here, we can record those kinds of power fluctuations and have the proof that the dealer needs to have some substantive action taken, right? So sometimes, Jimmy mentioned this before, sometimes the action is not to sell equipment, but it is to do maintenance on the electrical distribution system. The wire that we use in our electrical distribution is primarily copper. Sometimes you'll see some aluminum in there, just depends on the age of the house and which conductors, but both copper and aluminum is a relatively soft material compared to other metals that are really, really hard. So what that means is when you bear down on them with your screw connections, right, that you see in these breaker panels, you know, after a couple of months, if it's a new thing, or maybe a couple of years, the metal will just slightly give, and now you've got this intermittent connection that's on there, and it shows up in the voltage levels, right? You know, when we look at these Envision logs or the Squid logs, we can tell right off the bat if it's a loose connection. And actually, I had a loose connection system here. I know you think this is a setup, but it was about 2 weeks ago. We had some storms coming through. I thought that the issue was storm related, but I live in an old section of Charlotte, North Carolina. All the power lines are overhead. I can see the power lines through my window here, and I know that my transformer is just right over there. It turns out that the connection between the transformer and the distribution wires, because the one transformer we can see is feeding about 3 houses in this general vicinity. I was having this intermittent problem, and it was weird because the TV was on and the lights behind me were flickering. You know, me being power aware, I knew what was going on. There's 2 phases of power that is powering our house. And you know, most people have 240 volt, which means it's 220 volt phases. One of the phases was intermittent and the other phase was fine, right? What happened was that intermittent action, that particular phase was hooked up to my home stereo AVR, and it reprogrammed it. It put such an intermittent power signal to it that it reprogrammed. So I was looking at the wrong audio input when I was watching TV, right? And you know, I know that sounds like a strange explanation, but all the people on this podcast will exactly know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, Arlen, I can vouch for this story because it was about then that he called and said, "Does Marantz have some sort of accommodation? Because I'm going to need a new AVR."
Yeah. Oh yeah. It went through. It took about 2 lives off the 9 lives of my AVR, so I definitely need a new one.
Well, Vince, if you wouldn't mind stopping the screen share for now, that's an excellent story, and certainly goes to show just that, you know, these products are problem solvers, and like you said at the beginning, that's all, you know, that's what your mission is, you know, how do you find these things? And case in point, right there, you're in Charlotte, you're near the hurricane territory, lots of potential natural, you know, implications on the power grid, and yet, you know, you found it through diagnostics and through thinking that it's just not that. With that, Jimmy, let me just have you wrap things up here in terms of, you know, we've been doing a lot of coverage on CE Pro and seeing a lot of trends in the market where dealers are crossing over into commercial applications. Commercial dealers are kind of doing the same, getting more into the residential applications. You know, just for sort of the final word on power, what are you hearing from your dealers in terms of being able to resolve problems on both sides?
Well, I think what I'll say is sometimes in the Resi world, I'll hear, well, this is a new construction, and so we won't have any power issues. Or I've got a dedicated 20 amp circuit, so it should be really clean, the power coming to that outlet. You know, I think on the commercial side, it's kind of assumed that, well, this building has a transformer outside, so it's going to be really clean power. And actually, in both worlds, more is done internally to add intermittent issues, noise into the power line. And so that can affect the equipment, you know, and the experience that the end user is hoping for, whether it's in a commercial space, and maybe it's more about, you know, uptime and not losing money, as opposed to in the Resi space where maybe it's more about the, you know, best experience we can give someone with a budget that we've got, right? One might be more emotionally tied and the other not. But in both cases, if we've got downtime, both end users are unhappy. And so at SurgeX, we do have products that can cater very well to either the commercial space, which is where we've built the SurgeX brand over 25 plus years, or the residential space where we've been working for more than 10 years now to build a brand into a meaningful position. And again, it revolves around application, and it's focused on the quality of power in either scenario. And in either scenario, commercial or Resi, we definitely need to be making sure that we don't just assume that the grid is going to give us reliable and consistent quality of power. So use a device like a Squid to assess the situation at the job site. Whether you're a Resi guy doing a bar, conference room, or full out corporate scaled project, house of worship, what have you, or you're in commercial and maybe you're not as familiar with the fact that, hey, the home's infrastructure is not quite like the commercial infrastructure, but guess what? Everybody has somebody next to them affecting their power, right? So let's assess what we're working with and then try to figure out how to best approach it. And that's where events and I and the rest of the SurgeX sales team can help.
Definitely. Well, certainly lots of implications impacting power these days on residential side, commercial side. So with that, Jimmy, Vince from SurgeX, thank you guys both for the time today. We really appreciate the insights into today's power solutions. SurgeX really has a nice range out there, and so it's great to kind of give those dealers a bit more of what they can talk about with their customers these days. So with that, thanks again for joining the CE Pro podcast.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you, Arlen.